Medication. Now, we've said a lot of times today that people with intellectual disability often present with medical issues requiring them to take multiple medications. And these medications can impact our swallow in a variety of ways, including side effects, complications, and esophageal injury. So if we look at dysphagia as a side effect of medication, we know that the esophagus has smooth and striated muscles, and the drugs which impact the function of these muscles, the smooth muscles like anticholinergics, they have the potential to cause dysphagia. Now, if we look at dysphagia as a complication of therapeutic action, so someone might have been given a medication, the medication's doing their job, but that then causes dysphagia. So medications that depress the central nervous system, for example, like anti-epileptics, benzodiazepines, narcotics, skeletal muscle relaxants, they all place the person at a greater risk for dysphagia due to decreased awareness, decreased voluntary muscle control, and a difficulty initiating a swallow. That's one of the big ones in the population I work with. And I guess the other thing is esophageal injury. So medication-induced esophageal injury is typically caused by local irritation. So you've tried to swallow your tablet, hasn't quite gone down all the way. That's a problem. Now, if we think about psychotropic medications, these are the most common medication group prescribed for people with intellectual disability who live in the community. And antipsychotics are the most common psychotropic agents. Now, we know that psychotropic medications impact the central nervous system, and that can therefore impact a person's swallowing. Looking at the risk factors, so the highest risk around medications and dysphagia are those medications where the primary actions or side effects cause dysphagia or suppress your gag or your cough, and we've spoken about them. It's having a person with a history of sensitivity to medication, so whether that's allergies or difficulty taking them, and it's also prescribing medications in an unsafe form. So, you might have suggested that a person is on moderately thickened fluids, but then they're also being given their medications in syrup form, for example, which isn't at that same level. So the medications isn't being given in the correct format. I think probably the take-home message around medications is that we really need to check what meds people are on and what they're taking, and have a bit of a think about how that can impact their swallow. So it's also can be really helpful to check a person's Webster pack, just because sometimes this is how you actually find out about someone's medical history. Oh, Laura's taking Pariet. Does she have a diagnosis of reflux? Or, oh, Tom's taking Epilum. Does he have epilepsy? If someone doesn't have observable seizures, maybe because they're taking Epilum, sometimes carers or family members can forget to mention these diagnoses, which is really important for us to know. The other thing, it's also important to talk about, or to talk to the person, about how they take their medications and the way they take them. So recently I was working with a man and I suggested that maybe he take one tablet at a time. He was having about 13 different tablets in the morning and about 9 at night, which is huge. And we wanted to have a conversation about maybe crushing the tablets, but I wanted to speak to his family about that first. So this particular man, his presentation fluctuated. Sometimes he was really active, sometimes he was really lethargic, and that could occur across the hour. Now, he can be quite a headstrong man, and he was getting a bit upset with his support workers who were making him take the tablets one at a time. So they asked me to review because it wasn't quite working and medications were becoming a big struggle. So I spoke with Ian about the importance of safe swallowing and how that includes swallowing tablets safely. He told me, well, his GP said he has to take them, it's very important. I said, yes, it is very important, but it does need to be done in a safe way. And so I asked him, how do you want to take your medications? What's important? What do we do? And he said, well, it's really important that I take them all the colours at the same time. So all the purple ones together, then all the yellow ones together, then all the white ones together. All right, well, we can definitely work with that. So instead of the staff handing out one med at a time in whatever order they felt like, we did, okay, one at a time in purple, one at a time in yellow, one at a time in white, and he was much more happy with that. I guess just thinking about the importance of collaborating with the client again to achieve some positive outcomes around whichever component of the mealtime we're looking into. Mental health. So again, we know mental health problems occur more frequently in people with intellectual and developmental disability than with others in the community. Now, these conditions can significantly impact on quality of life for the person, but also for their family and carers or friends. Now, there was this really interesting article that I read when I was preparing for this by Azimi and colleagues, and they looked at people with intellectual disability accessing psychiatric services and their coexisting health issues. So they identified that 97.4% of people had at least one coexisting health condition, and 75.6%, so 3/4 of the people, had 4 coexisting health conditions. Now, the sample size was fairly small, it was only about 80 people, but I still thought that was really interesting, those links between mental health, between intellectual disability, and between physical health conditions as well. So we know that the population that we're working with, particularly when they have mental health diagnoses, are at a significant risk. We also know that death due to asphyxiation, so following from choking on your food or drink, occurs far more frequently, so 43 times more likely to occur in people with mental health diagnoses than within the general population. And we've already spoken a little bit about psychotropic medications, but understandably, people with mental health diagnoses are more likely to be taking psychotropic medications, therefore increasing their risk of asphyxiation or aspiration. So mental health, it's a really varied field, and it can make it really challenging to work with this population. So if you have a bit of a think about those additional challenges, we really need to consider that assessment might take a lot longer for people with intellectual disability and mental health than other populations. Now, I spoke a little bit before about a client I was working with intellectual disability, autism and bipolar disorder. This particular man, he's constantly on the go, constantly moving, has a really strong desire for movement, and when he's in his manic phase of bipolar, he barely stops speaking, so it's constant chatter, chatter, chatter. He talks through the whole day, including when he's eating and drinking, and he spends a fair amount of time coughing, particularly on his fluids, or clearing his throat after he swallows. Now, his mealtime skills fluctuate depending on his mental health state, and I guess my difficulty in working with him was that his needs around his meal times change so frequently dependent on where his mental health was at. So I guess after a lot of observation and assessment and data recording, we trialled him using some mildly thick, so level 150 fluids, and found that this was fairly helpful in terms of decreasing his observable indicators of aspiration. And while, it's not our role to address the mental health needs, I guess it's about considering some strategies we can use to facilitate meal times in the context of mental health. One of the big things I think that we need to consider is when people have fluctuating presentation, it's really important to observe them on a good day, but also on a bad day, and also across the day. So this is relevant for mental health, but also really relevant for other people with other conditions, so epilepsy or other neurological conditions. We need to really think about, are there times of the day when the person finds swallowing a whole lot easier? How can we generalise those? We really need to think about working as a team. I think that's the biggest thing for me, asking for help and getting help when I need it. I know there are people out here who are much more amazing clinicians than me, but I have no idea how I could do some of the work or mealtime management support with the clients I work with without consulting with an entire team. I think that would be really, really difficult. And the other thing which I've got up there is about how recommendations, you might need to have different recommendations depending on the person's presentation. And I guess the challenge there might be about how you document that. So one specific mealtime recommendation when the person is calm, and another one when they're maybe a bit upset or agitated. And I guess it's also about educating the support workers or the mealtime partner about how to facilitate that during the mealtime. We've got our barriers and solutions. And then just moving on quickly to behaviours of concern. So again, we know that people with intellectual disability present with behaviours of concern more frequently than the general population, and behaviours of concern are more common in males, particularly between the ages of 15 and 35. And understandably, people with difficulties with communication, with sensory processing needs, with decreased social skills and other mental health diagnoses are also more likely to present with behaviours of concern. Now, within our population, behaviours are complex and varied. I guess they can be habitual. They might be maladaptive patterns associated with medical conditions or medication side effects, which we've spoken a little bit about before, or they may be related to psychiatric diagnoses. And I guess the other thing to consider is behaviours stemming from communication or sensory needs as well. So some common behaviours of concern around mealtimes might be things like uncontrolled eating rates, so eating really quickly, putting too much food on your spoon and having too much in your mouth, gorging on your food, disruptive mealtime behaviours, being really apprehensive about food, obsessive routines, so having to do things exactly the same every single time. Some people might consider regurgitation and rumination as a behaviour, but there can be other physiological issues around that as well, or physical violence around the mealtime. So there's a whole lot of different types of behaviour that we might see. And behaviour can be really hard to pull apart, and often there's more than just one underlying cause. I spoke a bit earlier this morning about the client I worked with who was regurgitating and ruminating a lot on all of his food. His weight had gone down to 37 kilos and he's as tall as me, so that was quite slim. Lots of the support staff that worked with this client constantly said, oh, he's just doing it to annoy me. It's just his behaviour. Now, more assessment identified that he also had oropharyngeal dysphagia, and he was really just attempting to communicate. So this client would use keyword sign to request a drink or something to eat or to go outside, and the staff wouldn't respond to his communication attempts. So typically he would try maybe 3 times. He would ask for a drink 3 different times, and if nobody responded, then he would make himself regurgitate because that got someone to come over to him. They patted him on the back, he got a bit of attention, and then he might maybe get a drink after that. And that behaviour turned out to be a much more effective way to get his message across or to get what he wanted than the keyword sign. When we sort of flipped that around and did a bit of education and kind of really forced the understanding of sign language, we had a bit of a better outcome for him. But I suppose it's about looking at your behaviour and how that can impact the mealtime overall. So the function of the behaviour, your ABCs, having a look at different presentations, the fluctuation, which we saw before, and thinking about communication is really important. I often hear support workers or teachers or sometimes parents saying, oh, she's just doing it to annoy me, or she's coughing intentionally. Well, I guess it's about educating between the differences between a reflexive cough or maybe a throat clear to get someone's attention. But yeah, having a bit of a conversation around that behaviour about mealtimes. And the other thing which we probably need to consider is, again, around that risk management side of things. So considering your safety and the safety of the person you're assessing. So asking before you go, does the person have a behaviour management or behaviour support plan? And what strategies can I use or implement if that person starts to need a bit of extra support around their behaviours? Is there a good place where I could sit or stand or observe this person for mealtimes? Do we need to get some extra staff to come on shift to kind of facilitate this mealtime assessment? Will an extra person in the room be disruptive? Do we need fewer people in the room? What's going to work best for the person? And I suppose the other thing is thinking about the behaviours of concern of other housemates or maybe other children in the school, and what are the management strategies for those people. So earlier I gave that example about the woman that ended up biting my arm. And yeah, thinking about what else is going on in the environment and how that impacts people's behaviours. And I suppose the main message overall around behaviour at mealtimes and behaviour in general is, let's really think about prevention and about preparation as well, of the person we're working with and also the other people in the environment. Okay, so we've gone on a little bit about all the factors kind of around mealtimes, around mealtime assessment, a few other bits and pieces to consider. I guess delving into the actual assessment that we actually have to do, the physical stuff, looking at an OMA. So the SPA guidelines recommends that we do a cranial nerve assessment and an OMA as an integral component of the mealtime assessment. And we know that an OMA is really important because it gives us some clues around what we might expect when we see someone eating and drinking and swallowing. But it's also important to realise that completing an OMA with somebody with an intellectual disability might be a bit more tricky and might take a little bit more time. So have a bit of a think about the person's cognition and communication skills. How can you present your instructions or information in a way that they understand? The other thing is your OMA might need to be fairly informal, so gathering information while you're taking a case history, while you're getting to know the person, while you're watching them set up their mealtime environment. Smile at them. Do they smile back? Have a look at their laugh lines. Have a look if they're symmetrical. Do they have an open mouth posture at rest when they're just sitting on the couch? Can they achieve a lip seal at rest? Or when they're talking, are they breathing through their mouth or their nose or both? What's going on with their saliva? Are their lips dry or cracked? Practice singing, that sometimes works. Maybe with the kids, practice being in an ambulance. Ooey, ooey, ooey. Having a bit of a think about how we get our message across, what model we need to provide for someone to copy, what language they understand, do they need pictures, can we practice the same thing with everybody around the table? I guess there's a lot of things around that. And the other side of things is about maybe looking at what other functional activities can we do to get a bit more information for that OMA. So cleaning your teeth, if you watch someone cleaning their teeth, well, we can see how far they can open their jaw or what they can tolerate in their mouth or what's going on around that. Singing, which I said about before, maybe videoing the person on the iPad, so have the camera app facing you so the person can see and get some feedback about the way their mouth moves or the funny faces they're making, or you could do it in a mirror. There's a bunch of different things that might work around that. And a few things to think about around the OMA is, yes, let's consider our communication and cognition. Can the person not complete the task, or is it they do not understand the instructions around the task? Commenting on everything, so even if you don't see it or you can't observe it, that's okay, but we really still need to document that we didn't see it or didn't observe it, because that gives us a bit of extra information and indicates that we've actually looked for something. It might take more than one session, it might take more than one time to figure out what the person's mouth and face are doing. And I guess the other side of that is about level of comfort. So how comfortable is the person having someone that close? It can be a little bit confronting to have someone poking around in your mouth and face and jaw and lips and all those things. So how can we put the person at ease? What's the best way to prepare them for the OMA? Do other people who work with them, can they be really helpful in that instance? Or, if we do it with their friend first, are they more likely to do it? Just a few other considerations around that.